The popular image of Christ as gentle Jesus, meek and mild, simply will not do. It is a false image. To be sure, he was full of love, compassion, and tenderness. But he was also uninhibited in exposing error and denouncing sin, especially hypocrisy. Christ was a controversialist. The evangelists portray him as constantly debating with the leaders of contemporary Judaism. So wrote John R.W. Stott in his book, Christ the Controversialist. In Mark chapter 2, verse 1 through chapter 3, verse 6, Mark gives 5 accounts with the purpose of introducing the controversy between Jesus and the religious authorities. The stories have a common theme, but are not chronological in order. By the end of these 5 stories, Mark has shown his readers that many of the religious authorities are unbelieving antagonists who badger Jesus at every opportunity. The climax of these 5 incidents is in chapter 3, verse 6. Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. First, we notice controversy over forgiving sin, chapter 2, verses 1 through 12 of Mark. A few days later, when Jesus again entered Capernaum, the people heard that he had come home. So many gathered that there was no room left, not even outside the door. And he preached the word to them. Some men came, bringing to him a paralytic carried by 4 of them. Since they could not get him to Jesus because of the crowd, they made an opening in the roof above Jesus, and after digging through it, lowered the mat the paralyzed man was lying on. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now some teachers of the law were sitting there, thinking to themselves, "Why does this fellow talk like that? He's blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" Immediately Jesus knew in his spirit that this was what they were thinking in their hearts. And he said to them, "Why are you thinking these things? Which is easier, to say to the paralytic, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Get up, take your mat and walk'? But that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." He said to the paralytic, "I tell you, get up, take your mat, and go home." He got up, took his mat, and walked out in full view of them all. This amazed everyone, and they praised God, saying, "We have never seen anything like this." The first controversy dramatically focuses on the identity of Jesus. We have the account of a 4th specific miracle performed by Jesus. The miracle again shows the authority of Jesus, but takes second place to an even more dramatic indication of Jesus' identity. He forgives sins. Jesus is now back in Capernaum. He was in the house, in the home, probably Peter's house. Based on Mark's previous descriptions of the crowds that gathered in Capernaum, the reader is not surprised at the intensity of this crowd. Jesus was teaching the word. From chapter 1, verses 14 and 15, he no doubt was preaching the kingdom. These 4 men demonstrated ingenuity and effort in getting their paralyzed friend to Jesus. The typical roof was flat and had stairs leading to it. Beams of wood were overlaid with thatch and mud. Luke speaks of the man being lowered through tiles. Rather than healing the man, as many might have expected, Jesus tells him that his sins are forgiven. The scribes recognized Jesus' statement as an implied claim to a special relationship with God. They accused Jesus of blasphemy because he claims to do what only God can do. Jesus knows what the scribes are thinking. He poses a counter question, an approach he will use often. His question, which is easier, probably refers to verification. It seems easier to say, "Your sins are forgiven," because that cannot be verified. To say, "Get up, take your mat and walk," is a statement that can be quickly and easily verified. If Jesus can heal the paralytic, then his claim to forgive the sins of the paralytic must be taken seriously. The scribes are correct in their conclusion that forgiving sins indicates a special relationship with God, but they mistakenly refuse to accept the correct conclusion. In healing the paralytic man, Jesus demonstrates that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. We notice here that Jesus refers to himself as Son of Man. This is the first time this is used in Mark. It will be used again a little later in the chapter. In fact, in the Gospel of Mark, it will be used 12 additional times. This title has been vigorously studied without consensus on its background or how Jesus used it. It is mainly used by Jesus himself. It was his most common title for himself. Jesus may have used it to identify himself as the one like a Son of Man in Daniel's vision. Jesus' claim to be this Son of Man was not simply a reference to his humanity, but an exalted claim with messianic overtones. The account of the paralytic is important. The authority of Jesus is repeated and heightened. He not only can heal, but he can also forgive sins. The story introduces the antagonism between Jesus and the teachers of the law. The faith of the paralytic and his friends is contrasted with the antagonism and disbelief of the teachers of the law. Secondly, we see controversy over eating with tax collectors and sinners, verses 13 through 17. Once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," Jesus told him, and Levi got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said to them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." Jesus teaches the crowds. He does so in the synagogue, in the house, by the lake, that is the Sea of Galilee, and he often draws large crowds to hear him teach. On this occasion, Jesus calls Levi, a tax collector, to follow him, and Levi does so. Matthew's gospel identifies Levi as Matthew himself. Now, tax collectors were despised for defrauding people to increase their commissions and for working for the hated Roman government. Levi, or Matthew, invites Jesus to a meal at his house. Other tax collectors as well as sinners were present. Many of these two groups were following Jesus. Now, who were the sinners? Well, they were those who were viewed as opposing God's will. For many first century Jews, who one had table fellowship with was an especially important matter. The scribes, who were Pharisees, find Jesus' table fellowship with tax collectors and sinners offensive. In their view, this was improper behavior for Jesus' supposed status as a religious leader. Now, this is the first time Mark refers to the Pharisees. They will appear many times during Jesus' Galilean ministry, but Mark will mention them only once by name in Jerusalem. The Pharisees were the leading party among the Jews in Jesus' day. Although the Sanhedrin was controlled by the Sadducees, the Pharisees were probably the most popular among the people. The Pharisees maintained a strong commitment to traditional beliefs and practices handed down through previous generations. Jesus responds to the accusation of the Pharisees with a common proverb. It is the sick who need a doctor. Jesus is not defending sin. He's not implying that the Pharisees are righteous. He makes the point that his task is to call sinners to God. To do so, he must be in their company. One writer has said that what was new and original in Jesus' attitude was he did not avoid sinners, but sought them out. We next see a controversy over fasting, verses 18 through 22. Now John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting. Some people came and asked Jesus, "How is it that John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees are fasting, but yours are not?" Jesus answered, "How can the guests of the bridegroom fast while he is with them? They cannot, so long as they have him with them. But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them, and on that day they will fast. No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth in an old garment. If he does, the new piece will pull away from the old, making the tear worse. And no one pours new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the wine will burst the skins, and both the wine and the wineskins will be ruined. No, he pours new wine into new wineskins." As in the previous story, this controversy centers on the Jewish traditions rather than on the clear demands of Mosaic law. The law of Moses only required fasting on the Day of Atonement, one time a year. Now, the Old Testament does commend fasting as pious behavior. By the time of Jesus, many pious Jews fasted twice a week. The Pharisees held such traditions in high honor. Regular fasting was practiced by the Pharisees and by the disciples of John the Baptizer. Many may have assumed that Jesus and his disciples would also fast. They may have even viewed the customary practice as mandatory. Well, Jesus answered the complaint with three metaphors. The first is that of a wedding feast. Jesus' implication is that his presence is like a wedding celebration. One would not fast during a wedding celebration. Jesus' disciples do not fast while he is with them. A time will come when Jesus will be taken from them, and then they will fast. This statement is an allusion to the death of Jesus and the mourning that would follow. Now, this is the only reference to Jesus' death in Mark before chapter 8. Jesus uses the metaphors of the unshrunk piece of cloth being put on an old garment and of new wine into old wineskins. These two metaphors are parallel in meaning. The point is similar to the point of the bridegroom analogy. The tradition of fasting is part of an old garment or old wineskin. The presence of Jesus presents a new situation that makes the old form of fasting inappropriate for his disciples. Jesus' disciples need to act in a way that agrees with the new situation that Jesus has created. The coming of Jesus and the kingdom call for a joyful response, not fasting, which was associated with mourning. We next see controversy over picking grain on the Sabbath, verses 23 through 28. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and his disciples walked along. As they walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" He answered, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. Then he said to them, 'The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath.'" The fourth and fifth situations of controversy in this series concern interpreting the Sabbath law. The criticism about picking grain is not about stealing. The old gleaning laws allowed the disciples to pick a few heads of grain as they went along. The criticism is because they were doing it on the Sabbath. The disciples are being accused of violating the Sabbath by working. And we might expect Jesus to argue that such activity was not really a Sabbath violation. Instead, he argues that there are special circumstances where one breaks the Sabbath without guilt. Jesus gives a story about David the consecrated bread as a parallel case. When circumstances were normal, no one except the priest could eat the consecrated bread. The circumstances of David were special. He and his companions were hungry. It is also significant that David was the appointed king of Israel. Probably neither the Pharisees nor Jesus would have approved of just any hungry band of men eating the consecrated bread without guilt. The situation of Jesus and his disciples was similar. Jesus says the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Alan Black observes, Jesus would not approve of a legalistic approach to the Sabbath, in which no work could ever be done regardless of the circumstances. The Sabbath law was created to help people, not to harm them. We have the statement, the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. Jesus has already declared his authority to forgive sins. He now declares his authority to make judgments about the Sabbath. Jesus tries to get the Pharisees to recognize both that in some cases the Sabbath law may be broken without guilt, and that the Son of Man has the authority to determine such cases. And then we see controversy over healing on the Sabbath, chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. Another time, he went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." Then Jesus asked them, "Which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" But they remained silent. He looked at them in anger and, deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts, said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. The Gospels describe several occasions when Jesus was criticized for healing on the Sabbath. There were differing opinions among the Jews in Jesus' day about what could be done on the Sabbath with respect to the health of humans and animals. The emphasis of this incident is not so much on another example of Jesus' healing power. The focus is on the conflict over healing on the Sabbath. Now, a withered hand is not life-threatening. Many would think that the healing could have taken place on another day. Well, Jesus believed it was permitted to do good on the Sabbath. And so he asked the question, which is lawful on the Sabbath? To do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill? Ironically, Jesus' opponents used the Sabbath day to plan his death. Verse 6 is the climax of the 5 accounts of controversy. The opponents of Jesus are ready to kill him. Every subsequent reference to the Pharisees involves their intention to murder Jesus. Now, little is known about the Herodians. They are mentioned here in Mark chapter 12, verse 13, and in one reference in the history of Josephus. The Herodians were a group that supported Herod. While they would not be the natural allies of the Pharisees, quite often a common enemy brings former enemies together. Charles R. Erdman said of our text, in the first chapter of the Gospel, we read of the wide, even embarrassing popularity of Jesus. With the second chapter begins a record of conflict. The people still throng about him, but the rulers are offended by his claims. They are shocked by his reception of sinners. They are angered by his teaching in reference to fasting and to Sabbath observance. Tommy South observed, those who insist on thinking of Jesus as someone meek and mild, and who never was at odds with anyone, will find little comfort in Mark's gospel. Mark shows that Jesus was frequently in conflict with those around him, up to and including his own physical family, and at times, even his own disciples. Yes, we see in Mark Christ the controversialist. Things weren't always nice and rosy and peaceful. He came into conflict with those who were opposed to the will of God.